Okay, I'd like to end up today by just doing a brief overview of where we're going with this class because we have some really interesting topics that we're going to be covering. So this first lecture, we had an introduction to consumer psychology and research methods. Right? Now, our next lecture will be on the consumer decision-making process. Did you know that we tend to be happier with a purchase if we had maybe 5 to 9 choices rather than, say, 37 choices? Something really interesting we'll be looking at as an example in this decision-making lecture called Miller's Rule. We can hold about 7 things in working memory, give or take 2. So if you get much more than that, and in your choices, it can become a little overwhelming. But what's really interesting is that it can even affect our happiness with a purchase later. Okay. Lecture 3, we will be looking at cultural influences. Did you know that Cosmopolitan magazine publishes completely different topics in their Chinese version magazine? Because publishers of the Chinese version are not permitted to even mention sex. They have to replace most of the articles. And as an example of that, they actually replaced an article recently that was about uplifting cleavage to one that was about uplifting stories of youth dedication in the communities. Now, lecture 4 is going to be on ethics and the lack thereof sometimes, right? What protections do we have as consumers? What protections are given to us federally? What can we do as consumers to protect ourselves? As far as federal ones, how have these failed to keep up with the times? We've all been victims of phishing scams, or we know somebody who has. And worse yet, things like botnets hijacking our computers just to turn us into little advertising machines. What other ways are ethical lines being crossed or fuzzy in advertising? It's really going to be an interesting lecture. Okay. Sensation and perception will be the topic of our 5th lecture. Love this one. You know, what's the scoop on, let's say, subliminal perception? Do you think that you could be persuaded to buy something by an advertisement that was presented subliminally? It's one of the things that we will look at under sensation perception. Lecture 6 will be about learning and memory. Marketers clearly have learned that repetition plays, but when is repetition too much? Okay. Toyota ran a commercial featuring a reworked version of Fix's song called Saved by Zero so many times that over 10,000 viewers organized a Facebook group to petition the company for mercy. Please stop, right? When is repetition too much? Lecture 7 is an interesting one. It's going to be on personality and the self. Personality. You know, how good are you at, let's say, delaying gratification? And how might this personally affect your spending decisions? Lecture number 8, will be on attitudes and persuasion. You know what comedian once said, sometimes I sit and think, and sometimes I just sit. There are times when we process things more or less carefully, right? And this can affect our purchasing decisions. And what is the inoculation effect in psychology? And might you be able to self-inoculate, making yourself less vulnerable to persuasion? Lecture 9, Social Environment and Influence. So social influence. Did you know that people tend to relax and thus spend more time with each other in a blue environment? What kinds of sales tactics have been used on you in the past? The ones that you were aware of, you're going to be able to think of, but have you ever wondered how many were used on you that you were not aware of? Lectures 10 and 11 are both on identity. So the first part of that is lecture 10, and that covers gender and subcultures. What does gender have to do with it? And what about subcultures like where you live? Can you think of a product that might sell really well in the southern states, but totally flop in the northern ones, or vice versa, right? Lecture 11, the second part of identity, will be social class and lifestyles. A Greek philosopher once said, know who you are, then adorn yourself accordingly. We're going to explore ways in which social class and lifestyle affect how we adorn ourselves, what we feed ourselves, in other words, our purchasing decisions. Hey. And then we're going to end the class. The final lecture will be Contemporary Frontiers. We're going to explore cutting edge phenomena like buzz marketing and viral marketing. What are product pushers? What's e-tailing as opposed to retailing? Yes, at the end of this class, we are going to boldly go where no one has gone before or where they've only recently ventured. Okay, so stay tuned for a very interesting journey this semester. And what I'd like to do with each of our lectures in this class is to wrap up with a few ideas of how the material you learned in this lecture can be used to make you a wiser consumer. Just a few examples just to get you started, because I'm sure you can come up with many more. And we're even going to do this with this very short introductory lecture that focus mostly on research methods. So for our last slide, 3 tips. Okay, tip number 1, practice identifying something that's called illusory correlations. Illusory correlations, in other words, false ones. People have a tendency to take correlational statements that just state a relationship, and jump to causal conclusions. And marketers often exploit this. Here's an example from a real political ad. The economy went downhill the first year so-and-so has held her elected position. Guess what? The year was 2007, and the economy crashed everywhere, regardless of who was or was not in office. Here's another example. Women with beautiful skin use Olay. Think about it. So tip number 2, question samples. What about 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this toothpaste? Why did they only ask 5? I mean, that's not nearly enough from which to draw a conclusion for real research, right? And so just who were these 5 that were used? Friends of the manufacturer? Okay, tip number 3, question the source. Unless it is explicitly stated, tested by the FDIC or researchers at a named public university, which is really rarely the case, right? That you hear that. You can pretty much conclude that the company conducted the research, and the company is not an unbiased source. A biased source can affect not only things like which dentists were selected, but the methods that were used and how the data is analyzed, and so on, and so on, and so on.